So hello, this is your host, Isabel Manalso. I've been your host the entire weekend, so haha! I, I hope you're used to me by now, because I'm not going away, apparently. Um, so welcome to the 7th stream of our stream weekend here at Hiveworks under the hashtag BeHome. So we have this one today, what the heck does an editor do all day? And then we've got world building nopes right after at 3 o'clock. So definitely tune in for both of those. And excuse me.
Uh-oh.
So just as a reminder, generally, if you're tuning into Twitch, if you scroll down from the viewing window, we've got a couple of fun links that you can check out. So we've got a current sale in our store that's going on right now. So it's spring 2020 as the code. It gets you 10% off. So definitely grab some books and stuff. Now is the time. We've also got 2 Kickstarters running, one for Alice and the Nightmare Book 1 and one for Among Us Book 1. And both are very excellent books. So one is a YA school fantasy story. And the other one is a romance story around the themes of music. So both are definitely worth your time. As always, if you're new to Hiveworks, definitely check out our Twitter and our direct site for a bunch of free comics to read. All our comics are free to read online first and then published as books. So you can, get your preferred format, like digital book, physical book, just reading online. As it's posted gradually, you have all the options. And be sure to also follow Iron Circus on Twitter. They're also currently doing panels under the hashtag PajamaCon. So definitely check that out for more fun content and more creators to discover. So this stream, what the heck does an editor do all day, is essentially a bit of a stream to sort of demystify what editors do and express to people what is our use in the pipeline of creation. Because most big businesses have editors, and no matter the size of the publisher, if they have editors, we tend to pretty much do the same thing. So, it's pretty easy to break that down if you have some experience, especially if you speak to other editors. And by speak to editors, I mean, complain to each other because we have the same problems. So, if you have that, you usually get a pretty good idea of what everybody in the industry is kind of dealing with. Although I have to admit that people that have to deal with online content, like editors that deal with online content, often have their own very specific experience. So we will get into that as well. With me for this stream, I have Brad Brown, who is my co-editor at Slipshine and my co-editor at Hiveworks. So Brad does both and is also the author of Blaster Nation, which is a completed comic that you can read in full, and the ongoing mature comic Rockcocks, which is not for all audiences, but if you're 18 plus, is definitely a good read if you like that salacious content. And
Happy
also,
to be here.
yay! Also with us we have Atla Afne. God, I'm sorry.
Every time you try to pronounce it, and every time I just start giggling.
I know.
I love it.
This will stay a gag forever.
Oh, yeah.
It's all right. I didn't know how to pronounce either of your last names.
It's a language barrier. So Atla is here again. She was in previous streams and has returned to talk about the work of an editor. And Atla actually does editorial work both within Hiveworks and as a freelancer. So there's a lot of experience to pull from, both with dealing with clients directly and dealing with clients in the context of working for a larger, client. So that's going to be pretty fun. So I thought we could first talk about editorial as a whole, as a job, essentially what we do, and then sort of move into how we work with creators, and then maybe get a little anecdotal and talk about some situations that were really bizarre or difficult or really charming and inspirational as well, So what an editor does, And like anybody can chime in at this point. I'm done with the spiel.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Go ahead. It sounded like you were.
Yeah, what an editor does essentially, with most publishers, is that they're kind of in the pipeline. They're kind of the point between what is inbound and what is outbound. So inbound being like when an artist and their agent or an artist alone sort of contacts you to have a work proposed to the publisher you work with. So the editor's job becomes deciding if a work is interesting for that editor, either in its current form or to dedicate some of their time into essentially improving the work or shaping the work to the specific editor, because some editors do have a certain kind of branding in the sense that they're going to want the work to fit a certain type of media to be part of like their library. So essentially
Right.
they sort of take the work and they receive it and they transform it a little bit and they propose it to their bosses. And if it gets accepted, then the editor's job is to essentially keep production going and keep the pages coming and keep the artists happy and feeling like they're supported until the book is realized. And then the editor basically transfers it to the next department, which tends to be pre-press, which is the preparation of the book for print, and marketing, which is the preparation of the book for promotion. So that is really what an editor does. In essence, it's taking something that is personal and essentially helping to shape it into a product and helping that product to get into the world.
Yeah.
And that
Make
seems like, yeah, that seems like it's kind of like, that seems like I'm just describing that for like big companies, but that's also the experience for small companies. Like
Oh yeah, not just books either, but webcomics like what we do.
yeah, like digital works. Like a good example is the work that we do for Slipshine, which again, to sort of like preface, Slipshine is a mature comic website. So, you know, anybody
Right.
who's not 18 in the audience, you don't, we didn't tell,
We're
you didn't tell you nothing.
yeah, we're gonna keep this all ages, but
Yeah. But essentially, you know, it's looking for creators and finding them and helping shape the stories to the Slipshine brand and making sure that the content sort of follows the guidelines that Slipshine wants for the works that we essentially have on their platform, the works that represent us, you know?
yeah.
Atla, you've worked as a freelancer for a lot of creators to help them actually prepare the works to propose to a big publisher. What's your experience in like being part of that pipeline as an independent editor?
Oh, that's interesting. So first off, you as a freelancer, in thing like you said, like what you're mostly doing is people who don't have like an agent, they don't have like a publisher with them. They're still kind of like very green around art or in terms of their writing, and they effectively aren't just coming to you for like advice on how to like tighten up the plot. They're effectively coming there to like level up their entire skill sets. You know, like usually these are people who because like once they're agented or once they've got like more industry experience, they don't have necessarily a need to approach like just some freelance editor, you know. um
So it's really
Specifically because
about like your focus is really on the like, let's make this a product, let's improve you like experience. You're fully trying to shape the artist into being like
yeah,
interesting for
like
publishers all around.
yeah, exactly. Like there's, I think in my like I've worked on, you know, not just comics, but like visual novels and like radio play series and stuff like that. And like throughout my entire kind of like 3 4 years that I've been doing this, I don't think I've had more than a handful of creators who already have like some sort of collective. And like I've had a couple, and I've definitely had more artists that like started with me and then went on to do like really big projects. But generally speaking, those people don't come back because like freelance editing at its core, like you said, is like a waypoint. Like it's like step three of like your 100-step journey or whatever. And
So
so it's like
essentially, after people like, after you help people get through stuff, do you have like a proud mama bird watching baby leaving the nest kind of feeling?
well, that's sometimes yes, like definitely like there's definitely artists where I'm like, oh man, you were like I knew you when you were just starting out, and now you have like a deal at like HarperCollins, or you have like a Random House series going on, or like also there are definitely creators who are just like on the flip side who aren't necessarily interested in that whole like kind of book publishing, still like want to just get better. And this is the thing that
Yeah,
was most
they
surprising
want
to
their
me.
personal work to have a certain level of quality that satisfies them, even if it's not
Yeah.
necessarily to create a product. Well, it is still to create a product, but it's a product that they personally represent.
Exactly. Like I've had people who are like actively going into it knowing that they're not going to make a lot of money, they're not maybe even not going to make any money, like not even break even. And they still look at getting editorial help as like worth it because to them, like being better at making their little like zine that they have, like in Vancouver, not anywhere else, is still worth it to get better. Like
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, like it's really interesting because at the end of the day, they just want to be able to express themselves better. And I think with the proliferation of like web comics, there's a lot of people who understand comics as a storytelling choice, but they may not understand like the medium.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, definitely.
I think no matter what your skill level is, I think you're always going to need that editorial assistance. You always need an extra set of eyes to make sure.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like a buddy that you ask to read your thing. Like, you're asking, like, I remember when beta readers were super popular, and beta readers are just basically like the unprofessional version of editors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like crowdsourcing editors.
and like absolutely, there is that element of just like beta readers are effectively just like or like editors are basically just leveled up beta readers effectively. They do exactly what you would expect a beta reader to do, but just in a more in-depth capacity with a larger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I
Yes.
feel like all editors kind of feel also that, when you become an editor, like when you get hired to do that. I remember when I started editing, everybody was like, "Wow, you're really good at this. Like, did you study like languages or something in school?" And I'm like, "Fuck no." Like, for context, I was an accounting student. Like, as far from art as I could possibly be, but I have always consumed books in an absolutely absurd quantity, like comics and comics through various languages and platforms too, because I have the advantage of being French in origin. So I grew up on French comics, and then as I slowly acquired English, uh, I essentially started adding web comics and, well, English web comics anyways, and
Mhm.
like English comics and, manga as it started developing too, because I remember a time without manga. That's how old I
The
am.
Dark Ages.
Oh God, so bad. I never want to go back. And like all this stuff, sort of like all this like media soup, essentially sort of just created like an extremely good beta reader out of me, and someone who was like really, really good at analyzing story and analyzing the capacity of the person in front of me. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're like really good at this. Like, what did you like go to school for this?" And I'm like, "You can go to school for this?
Yeah, yeah, I
Nobody
don't have
told
any.
me."
I never really had any experience either. I was just a basic commentator like anyone else, just making uh, little critiques wherever I could for people who wanted them. Obviously, I wasn't one of those like YouTube jerks. Just
Hi, I noticed you have a story, and I have like a weird idea. Let's make this happen.
Yeah.
Like those messages.
Yeah.
I noticed that you were writing something successful, and I thought I should totally insert myself in this. You
I
know,
mean,
And I think,
no, go ahead.
uh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think, like, the thing that makes an editor viable, and it's such a simple thing, but it's something that I think a lot of people feel they struggle with, is everyone has the capacity to know whether something that they're watching is good or bad from a personal, subjective perspective, but not a lot of people have the ability to, like, put it
articulate
into
it.
words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And as soon as you can do that, you have the ability to be an editor effectively.
Yeah. It's
Like,
we were talking in the other chat how when you start to recognize that something is bad, you get like a weird, like you hate everything you do for a while because your brain is like, your brain has a like leveled up, but your hand and your like processing power hasn't leveled up yet, so you're still drawing pages and your brain is going like, hey, this is crap, but like you haven't gotten to the point where you like can rationalize that. You're like, oh, it's because I've my artist brain has become more attuned to whatever. So instead you just feel like garbage.
Yeah, I know how that is.
Yeah, you're just like, your brain is like, this is not good, but it doesn't like communicate it to you in a way that's like, oh, it's not good because you're actually learning. It's communicated to you in a way that's like, it's crap because you're crap, and you're like, oh, I'm sad now.
Okay, so I'm just a writer. I have no art experience at all, but it's that feeling is even worse as a writer because at a point you're just like, there's a technical skill to drawing, but with writing, it's literally just writing words. And why can't the words just get on the screen?
I mean, I'd argue that there's a lot of technical skill in writing as well.
Yeah,
it's very
but even
abstract
then, it's
technical skill, you know?
yeah,
It's not like, you can definitely look at art and be like, oh yeah, this, like, anatomy, I've acquired this skill. It's like, bing, that little Zelda
Yeah.
music. But for writing, you've acquired all these skills of storytelling and like mise en scène and all that stuff. But it's hard to go like, yeah, I know how to set a scene. Look at me go. Like it's hard to make that into words. And I think that's definitely like the best editors are definitely people who were writers or
oh yeah.
artists.
You need that experience. You need to know where the people you're helping are coming from.
You need to go through that suffering.
Yes.
I feel like that's really important. But like, to become a good editor, I feel you have to be a certain type of creator, if that makes any sense. Like, I
think
feel
so.
like most of my talent as a creator is adaptive. Like, most of the stories I try to do adapt like a fairy tale, or like I definitely work best playing off like materials or ideas. And sometimes I feel like because I focus on that when I write things, that's part of why I became a really good editor. So sometimes I feel like I'm better at like adapting than actually like writing, which is a weird feeling. But then other editors I talk to don't necessarily have that. But I still feel like it takes a certain like personality type or interest to become one, if that makes any sense. I don't know how you
Oh no,
guys...
definitely.
yeah, like it takes a couple of things, I would say. First off, it takes a large amount of empathy of people. Like, of all of the jobs that are, at least in comics, like, bless you, Brad.
Oh, that was Leslie, my wife.
Oh, all right. Bless you. But I was gonna say, like, there's this sense of like empathy that you need to have that are maybe like at a skill.
Oh,
you were
Atla,
at, like,
you're cutting out. Can you say that again?
absolutely. I said there's this. You have to have the ability to be empathetic towards other people. And you have to have the ability to like look at somebody who's below your skill level and go, here's what you can do. It's okay. Like, because I see a lot of people who like watch people who are maybe not as experienced as them and like get all high and mighty and get on their high horse and they're like, oh, you know, like get on my level, scrub. But you actually have to have the exact opposite reaction. You have to go.
Well, I wouldn't even say it's like being their skill level is below yours. I mean, you're definitely right in that you need that empathy. You need to. It's a lot more than just being like, or just going into it like this sucks. You just need to change it. It's more like having to basically figure out what they're trying to accomplish, getting into their mindset, and seeing how best you can help them get their view across, their what they're trying to get across.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and also like the empathy part is also to sort of try to detect emotional distress, because that's something that I feel is not talked about enough. But I feel like as a publisher and an editor, like no matter what the level you're working with creators, like either it's like direct creators that just hire you to improve their personal work, or creators who are really, really trying to create a product. Often you have a lot of creators who are very stressed right now because, you know, they're trying to fix their work.
Couldn't imagine why.
And sometimes they sort of take it out on you a little bit. Like, not necessarily in a, like, swearing at you and yelling at you. Although sometimes, yes, that does happen. But...
Yeah.
The stories I could tell.
Oh, yeah, I've got some, too.
The stories we will tell.
But sometimes it's just, like, inadvertently, because the stress rubs off on you, you know, it's part of it, and because you're using your empathy right now, you're just absorbing this. Like, I've had this one creator where it was a very, very difficult talk, because essentially we were coming to terms with the fact that the story they were working on just wasn't working with their identity anymore. Like, their identity had changed a lot. They had transitioned, and a bunch of other stuff had happened in their life that made it so that the story wasn't working anymore. So we were talking about like how to finish this within a year, and just the grief that the author was feeling, but also the relief they were feeling, was kind of like being transmitted from them to me, because they were like very jittery and very emotional in the talk. And after like the editorial meeting, and that was like a super early one at like 10 o'clock in the morning. So like initially my plan was to like do that meeting and have my full work day. But then afterwards I was just like, I'm going to take a nap. Like, I was just emotionally drained.
It's draining. Yeah.
Yeah. It's having that empathy and having that connection with people to help them work on a thing. Because if you're a good editor, you always have to connect with people and you always have to be emphatic. And it is emotional labor, you know. Sometimes it's fun. Yeah. Sometimes you're just talking to people and you're just like, and then the robot does this and you're like, yes! Like, sometimes that's the meaning. But sometimes it's like really hard, and and sometimes you gotta talk to people who quit, or you gotta talk to people who aren't happy with how things are going, or, you know, you talk with people who are not happy how things are going and they blame you for it. Yeah. Like, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it's
actually,
go
ahead.
No, I was done.
Oh, I was just gonna say I had a story similar to that with someone on Slipshine, where we were trying to get the story out, but they were just having so many difficulties with it, and I would keep giving them advice, but they just weren't able to incorporate it. And I mean, this never got to a point where like we were just yelling at each other, or just, it was more like I would offer some advice and they would ignore it and try it a different way. But it did get frustrating. But by the end of it, the comic just wouldn't work the way they intended it for it to. Like, characters would come off creepy when they're supposed to be endearing, stuff like that. But it turned out the artist was just going through such an emotional period, and the only reason they weren't listening to the advice was because they weren't feeling this comic anymore. So eventually we just had to scrap it, and we just worked on something brand new together, and they're a lot happier with it, and everything's like just fine now.
Yeah, there's
sometimes that's all it takes.
There's like a being the artist's shrink aspect a little bit. That's There's also there's people asking questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna like relay them.
Okay.
I don't have the chat or the Twitch open because otherwise my audio just lags a lot. So
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So
please
I'm
feel
just
free.
gonna pass a few of the questions. So someone asked, are we going to be streaming regularly? Yes, these are going to happen probably every 2 weeks after this. Not in like packs of 8 like this one, but just like one every 2 weeks or so. Other question, want to know how an editor who is also a creator doesn't just become too critical of their own work?
Oh, you don't. It just happens. You just have to live through it.
Yeah, I'm so critical of Namesake, and I think it's not so much about not being too critical of your own work, because you will be. Like, you can't take those goggles off. They're there forever. Like, they're strapped to your face now. The problem is that usually when you're really critical of a work that a creator is doing, and critical in the sense that you're trying to help them do something, that you're asking them questions, not critical in the sense that you're destroying something. Good critique, not bad critique, but
yes,
you're critical about your own work, but you don't have the space to process the critique, because when you're criticizing an artist, they have the space to take what you said and, you know, process it through a different brain. But while you're an editor and you're critiquing yourself, it's just like a loop in your brain. That's why, like earlier I was talking about how, like, it gives you this weird emotional, like, down where you're like, oh, this sucks. Maybe it's a me problem. Like, you're not thinking about it in terms of, like, I could improve stuff. This is where I find having a partner or working with partners really helpful, because sometimes I'll go up to my partner and be like, I feel like this sequence is bad. And she'll be like, no.
But no, you're right. Editors need editors. Everybody needs an editor.
Yeah, everybody needs like a creative friend who can talk you down from these and just really help you. Like, it's crazy. You don't have to have like a professional editor with like a monocle or whatever, but
no,
you always need a friend. The more you work in isolation, the worse it is, you know?
And editors are your friends.
I was gonna add to that and say like when I'm writing a graphic novel right now, and it gets so bad that like I pre-edit some of the things in terms of just like, no, does this actually work? No, I think that this is introduced too early, stuff like that. So I actually include that for the creative team, like my own like kind of pre-edits. So like, no, you can't ever like undo that. But I think one thing that can help, and this is something like another thing that I was gonna mention, is most readers need to see the beauty in broken stories or in like imperfect stories or like imperfections in general.
Oh yeah.
Like I was reading, I'm not gonna say which comic because it's like relatively new and I don't want to step on toes.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a comic that came out like a year or two ago by a relatively big publisher, and it's awful. It's like really, really bad. And fundamentally
okay, so
doesn't
you're just going like, ew. That's why you're not saying any names.
But like it's just like fundamentally doesn't work. And every page that I was reading it, I found new things that wasn't working. And I was genuinely like engaged and like enthralled by how much it didn't work. In a certain way, like the people who
go ahead.
Like in a certain way, like maybe not enjoying so bad it's good, but like rather just like seeing like I understand what you were going for here and I can see the effort, and even when it doesn't work I can still see the effort. And I think like kind of having that mindset sometimes when it comes to your own stories, like understanding, yeah, maybe it doesn't work right now, but you still have a draft, you still have 2 drafts to like polish it up.
Oh yeah.
And so like being kind of kind to other people's flawed work when it's not being like openly like malicious or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, all work is inherently flawed. There is no perfect story. Like, my first comic is kind of, you know, it's kind of like it's glittery trash because that's what I want it to be, you know. Sometimes the flaws are good. You don't have to, like, editorial is not so much about fixing stuff, it's more about figuring out what flaws are charming.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
And like that's one thing is like it's like there's a ton of.
I mean,
there's
except
a
for
ton
grammar, we definitely fix grammar.
most of the time, hopefully.
That does have a right and wrong way of doing it.
But like there's a ton of stories that like people release, like movies, video games that are like inherently just like an action fest story, or like a basic ass rom-com, or like a boilerplate like drama film. And like people may have mixed opinions about it, but the author or the creator usually did exactly what they set out to do. Like sometimes you
Yeah.
just want to make a boilerplate story and nothing else.
Yeah, sometimes you want to be a basic bitch, and that's fine. We need basic bitches. Like, sometimes you're gonna be freaking Isaac Asimov, and sometimes you're gonna be, like, Joss Whedon.
Yeah, I mean, hell, when I made Blastination, it was just I just wanted to do a slice of life, but with terrible, horrible nerds,
Yeah,
and that
like,
was it.
I wanted to draw fairy tales and hot wizards, okay? Just,
Admirable.
yeah, get off my back. So, next question. This one is actually really funny. How do you become an editor? What qualifiers are needed? Well, to be honest, a bunch of people who work as editors should not be editors.
No.
So I feel like how to become an editor is kind of like I applied to the job. So I guess the question is more like how to become a good editor. Because how to become an editor, period, is basically just like if you see a job opening, apply to it.
Mhm.
How to become a good one? It's like Atla was saying earlier, you have to cultivate your empathy, but you also have to cultivate like your analytical brain, and you also have to cultivate your culture. Like you have to read a lot, and you have to read about reading, and you have to go to classes about writing and about reading and about everything and like publishing, and it's like you have to really just sort of work on your knowledge, and not just like reading the classics. Like you can read classics all day long, but I think being a good editor is also keeping on top of what is being made recently. Like I read so many, like every time there's like new books on a monthly basis, so like New York Times bestsellers, I'll probably read half of those just to be like, what's the trend right now? And to sort of get interested in trends, not just content wise, but also trends like on television, trends in cover design, trends in what people like. Like
Mhm.
when Adventure Zone came out, suddenly D&D was like in all the books and comics, you know? Trends happen, and you kind of have to study what they're doing and study why people like it. Like right now, there's a return to the 80s. Why do people like the return to the 80s? Why do people like the aesthetic? These are like questions you should know or like ask yourself. You don't necessarily have to have like the best freaking answers to this, because again, you're not like a genius. You're
Yeah.
just some guy trying to analyze media. But the point is that you always have to sort of do it. Like if you meet an editor that's like and I've met guys like this, and like this editor is just like, ooh, the purity of the work, the I don't read books written by women or books that have been published in the last year. Like editors like that, like fuck those guys. They're the worst. I don't like those guys. They don't publish anything that I want to read, you know? You really need someone who's got like a finger on the pulse creatively, I think. As soon as you stop being interested in like what the young people are doing, but also being interested in like the history of literature and how things became what they are, because everything cycles back, you know? Like there's a reason the most popular comics on the internet right now are adaptations of older shit. Like Lore Olympus is a Greek myth. It's got a couple centuries under its belt. Yes, it is adapted for modern audiences, but it remains based on old stuff. You have to have that culture to be able to really help someone.
That ancient Greece throwback period.
Yeah, look, the ancient Greece throwback period comes back every decade. I swear to God.
People so nostalgic.
Yeah, everybody.
I would also say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. So I would also say that one of the fundamental qualities of an editor is understanding.
Oh, you cut off there.
You cut off.
Okay, Do I keep cutting off? That is so
Yeah.
annoying. Okay, am I back
I
on?
think you only cut off if you move away from the mic. Just just stay
Okay,
really close. Develop a
let's just stay
relationship.
really close. Here we
That
go.
Discord motion sensor. Or
So, I'd say that one of the most important things that you can have as an editor is an understanding of like, a project is not for you. There's a lot of
Oh my
projects
god,
that deal with
yes.
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of projects that deal with sensitive topics when it comes to like race, when it comes to gender, sexuality, and like colonialism, and a lot of stuff that even if you're interested, you may not be able to tackle. And even like in scenarios where you're like, oh, this author, like for whatever reason, like for me, like I sometimes try to budget with people who are like a little bit lower class or don't have a lot of money. So a lot of like young people of color telling their very, very personal stories come to me because I'm the only relatively affordable one, like in their general area. And so like my like personal rule is if they're explicitly talking about like their expression on like or their personal feelings on like race or whatever thing I don't have personal experience with, I just kind of leave that alone. I may make some suggestions like, hey, I noticed you have this thing that's really interesting about your own diaspora as whatever, like a Latino American person. Maybe we can develop that a little bit more, or like we can go a little bit in that direction. That seems really interesting. But outside of
Yeah.
that, you have kind of a responsibility to not with stuff that like that is so deeply personal and rooted in things that you don't know about.
Yeah, you want it to
Yeah.
shine through, but you don't want to interfere, basically.
I also notice sometimes like there's this weird situation where you have a creator, usually not someone that's from the background that they're trying to express, but sometimes you have a creator who's like, "Ooh, I really want to talk about like I want to make a comic about, the Queen of Hawaii." Which is like a good topic and someone should make it. Please, an artist from Hawaii, make this. I want to read this so bad. Um, I will edit you for free. Like, seriously. Um, but like sometimes you have someone who brings up a topic and you're reading about it and you know that you yourself as an editor like are not appropriate to edit the work, but then you notice that this creator you're working with is actually like in terms of like social literacy is actually at a lower level than you, so actually you're the perfect person right now to actually tell them that they don't know shit. It's a weird situation, but it has happened to me several times where it's like, oh no, oh baby no.
And there is that flip side where you realize that they are,
Yeah,
like
they have more social literacy than you, and then you're like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh man, I want to talk to you so much, but I don't want you to pay me for it. Like, I just want to have a
like
discussion.
and what I would add to that then is there's a ton of freelance editors that we could all name off the top of our heads that may be equipped for that. Like so if you want to be a good editor, a good thing to do is like collect a little curated list of like other editors that have like lived backgrounds that you don't have. So if somebody's like, I have here, like my experience about being a Black woman in like rural America, I'm like, I have the perfect editor for you who could do that, who actually is able to tackle that topic in a very, very human way.
Yeah, keep a list of your
Um,
colleagues and also make sure that your public site has a list of what you've edited so people can be like, oh, everything you do is YA. Here's my gritty adult 18 plus, whatever. Maybe not. Yeah, it's good to know who you're dealing with.
That's also just a good point, just as an editor, not being afraid to, seek out a second opinion to help with your own, to figure out how to help
Oh
the
yeah.
person you're editing. Because, I
I
mean,
mean,
like I
I
said, I'm
yeah.
not an artist. And so if somebody presents me a picture and it just looks completely wrong, like anatomically, I can grasp like something's not right here, but as someone with no art experience, I can't pinpoint exactly what. So I have Issa over here.
And then I redline it all, and then I let Brad deal with it. So yeah, it's essentially to become a good editor. It's like knowing your limitations, having empathy, learning from people, having like your colleagues and having a really good relationship with your colleagues. Like any editor who has competition with other editors, like, sucks. Like, it doesn't matter if you work for companies, even if the companies are like intense, like Capulet and Montague kind of relationship, like, doesn't matter. You're friends with the editors. You're not friends with like the marketing department or whatever, but the editors, you guys are pals. Like, you have to have that relationship.
We're your friends. We're here to help.
Yeah, united. So next question, would y'all say that the job has changed from like correcting grammar and spelling to like being aware of social more, checking in on folks, etc.? To be honest, the job of a publisher and an editor specifically has always been artist management.
Yeah.
Back early, like in the early days, editors did all this, and you also had artist managers that were like on the publisher payrolls and stuff like that, back when everything was in print and the internet didn't exist yet and stuff like that. In the 80s and 90s, there was actually this trend of author veneration, like the Stephen Kings and stuff like that. So, and there was a lot of cutbacks as well. So during that time period, editors started to get perceived as being useless, because that was also like an argument for editors to actually just cut them. And because there was a lot of offers, there was bestsellers that refused to have anybody look over their scripts, which is, you know, how we got a lot of Stephen King novels. Essentially, like, there was this idea that editors were just like grammar checkers, but that's not even their job. Like, usually you have people in publishers that are proofers. Proofers are people who check grammar. That's not even like an editor's job. But it just sort of became the illusion that editors are only there to either destroy your work or correct grammar. So the job never changed. The perception of the job actually changed. And more now, as big companies are really sort of moving into publishing, and publishing is becoming like an IP investment more than just a book investment, editors are just getting even more work than before, because the artist management becomes like way more important. And the work that's being created has to be farmed out for adaptations and stuff like that. So editors get a lot more work and a lot more expectations, because you sort of become the relay between the big publishers, like board of directors, shitty ideas, and the artists who get the consequences. So you have to become sort of the pipeline for that. So the job has like never changed, but has become more intense and has become extremely devalued, which is really sad. And I feel like part of the devaluing is because they were trying to cut them and pay them less and stuff like that. They were actually talking about how like part of the cuts was because of like comics, like DC and Marvel. They had too many editors and they were trying to like get rid of them or something. There was like a whole like smear campaign or something. I read an article about it, but I can't remember any of it. So, you know, I'm just telephoning this information that I read, but there was definitely like a lot of ridicule of it. But the job has never changed. Like being being like this person who manages artists and goes to fetch manuscripts and all that stuff has always been part of the job. Before I worked at Hiveworks, I worked for a French publisher, and I was basically like the bitch level editor, like, because you had senior editors, you had under that you had like the normal editors, under that you had like the minor editors that were essentially the assistants, and under that you had the assistants. So I was like assistant, I was minor assistant editor. That was like my title, which means that I was everybody's bitch. So my main job would be to go collect manuscripts and check it to see if an offer was live. And, you know, one time I turned up at an author's home and they were just like dead drunk in the entrance. So that was fun.
Oh, wow. So these were like actual like house calls?
For some of them, yeah. Some of them they would come to the office and you had to like greet them and give them coffee and check up on them, like entertain them for a little bit. That's why they would always pick like very young women for the bitch level, because, you know, they're like, oh, it's cute. There's a young lady like saying hello. Yeah. I know.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's like high heels were mandatory. It was really weird.
Oh no.
So not a good
This sounds
job.
like Mad Men.
It. I mean, yeah.
I'm
Like,
not saying it's not that.
yeah. It was, but yeah, sometimes they would come to the office and you just have to greet them and sort of like keep them entertained and talk about the manuscript they got and make sure that there's everything before you pass it on. That was like the bitch level. And for a lot of publishers, the bitch level doesn't exist anymore, so editors have to do like everything from bitch level to like head editor level, which is like straight up staff management work, you know?
Yeah.
It's just hard. So, you know, your editor works really hard. And I think we realized that too when offers go off the rails. Like, I'm thinking about JK Rowling a lot and how, like, she real dumb on Twitter. And I always felt like, based on reading the Harry Potter books back in the day and rereading them, like, as an adult, I always felt that she's always had these bad ideas. It's just that back in the day, she had an editor that, like, freaking pulled that out of the oblivion and removed the worst of it. And, like, whoever that editor was, they, like, deserve a basket of muffins for essentially helping invent YA, you know?
Yeah. I mean, George Lucas is also the famous example.
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah.
This is why editors are so important. Without us, you get the prequels.
Oh, yeah. Well, his editor was his wife, too. Like, it's often...
Really?
Yeah, the person who edited the movie, who did the cuts for the movie, was George Lucas's wife or girlfriend at the time. And, like, she only got credit for that recently. So...
Oh, that's why.
The original movies being that good were, like... And this was, like, unpaid work. I don't think she was, like, a formal editor. She just did it because she was like, this is trash. I have to fix it.
They're gonna make him a car salesman?
I think a lot of, especially in comics publishing, a lot of the editors that we perceive as the bad ones, I think a lot of them are, you know, like, basically writers that haven't gotten their they feel as their just desserts, and so they just, like, move into editing. And I mean, like, I started as a writer and then couldn't get work, so I went into editing, and then it became something that I was known for. So there are definitely, like, positive cases of that, but there's also people who, like, basically own, like, a publisher or own, like, a department or whatever, or, like, or oversee a department, and then they effectively just control kind of that beat of whatever the writers are doing. And there's a couple of examples, like, even at DC. I think it was Countdown to Infinite Crisis, or Countdown to Final Crisis, where it was just a mess.
Shit.
Yeah, it was just like a gigantic mess. And the rumor is that it was a fairly substantiated rumor, I think, that, like, it was effectively just the editors playing with the story in a way that like wasn't really appropriate in terms of how the work should have been split. And there are some cases, like, where I've had to actually intervene with examples like that, because at like DC and Marvel, they don't do it like we do, where it's like, you know, like, I work with the artist or the writer, and they work with their artist, and we kind of have this little triangle of trying to figure out what to do next. At, like, DC and Marvel, and a lot of, like, IP focused market or, like, publishers, they have, like, the writer hands in the script, and then the editor says, okay, the comic will be with you in, like, a couple of months, and then they take it from there and effectively independently work with the artist. There are plenty of examples of this, and there's actually an example. Gail Simone wrote an issue of Plastic Man, where, like, there was a moment where the character is dressing up as Harley Quinn, because Plastic Man can, like, bend himself into whatever form he wants to, and he bends himself into Harley Quinn, and she has like a trapped, like, bulge or whatever, like a trans woman bulge.
No.
And there's, like, a small controversy uprising on the Twitters, and I go up to Gail and I'm like, Gail, what the fuck is that? and we have a conversation, and at a certain moment we both realized there's been a fundamental misunderstanding, that she didn't actually know this was in the final page. She didn't, like, she had not written this into the script itself.
That's the issue also, like, for stuff like DC or Marvel, because the editor's job is to essentially manage the entire team, like penciler, inker, colorist, writer, and the editor's not necessarily informing the other party of what's going on. Like, sometimes it's like, okay, we paid you, you're done with the writer, and they don't come back. So, like, you don't always get, like, that happened to me too. Like, I wrote something for a one issue thing, and when I saw the art, I was like, oh no. Like,
yeah. There's even more egregious examples at, like, I forget what the publishes like licensed Disney comics is, but there was one writer who did like a Big Hero 6 comic, and they had gone through they had gone through the entire comic with just like, and just rewritten effectively the script fundamentally.
I heard about that one.
Yeah, so like that totally happens. And like even when I've been working with like smaller or like Hive sized like publishers on the side, like if I have an artist that hands in artwork and there's a writer who wrote it independently, me and the writer go through the artwork. Like they're both part of kind of like, so I'll hand in my edits and then the writer will be like, I noticed this isn't quite what I was going for. Can you change the expression here? And like even when I'm like, oh, this character the expression should maybe be a bit different, and they might come in and be like, no, that expression shouldn't be like the way you're describing it. You can change it like this, but not what you're saying, because that's not in line with what the character is saying. All of that to say, like, the writer can be much more, like, at the mid-tier, where it's not IP focused. Usually the artist and writer work in tandem with the editor, versus this more, like, kind of corporate angle of like, okay, you're done.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I find the okay, you're done is actually a negative. Like back in the day, DC editors were really just team managers, and everybody would sort of work into the office because artists would be hired like for life. It's just going to full freelancer forces the editors to do way more management for communications to be optimized, but they also have a fuck ton of writers and artists, so they don't have time. Like, it's a whole issue. We only got a couple of minutes left, and there's still a few questions, so I'm going to try to get us to go through as much of these as possible. How do you get an editor? Well, usually when you get hired, like usually if your IP gets bought by a formal publisher, you will be assigned an editor. If you're not working for a publisher of any size, either a small one or a big one, you can find one that is a freelancer like Atla. Usually there's people looking for work on Twitter or something like that, so you can find them that way. But if you're working like in a formal setting, you don't so much get one as you are given one. However, I think it's important to note you don't necessarily choose the editor that's assigned to you, but if you are working with a publisher, it's good to sort of note, like, if you're working with a lead editor or a team editor, because sometimes your editor won't necessarily be good for you. As we mentioned before, it's good for editors to know when a project is not for them, although sometimes an editor doesn't necessarily have the sort of self-awareness to realize this, or you don't jive personality-wise. So sometimes it's good to sort of know like who your editor's boss is in case you have problems with them.
Speak to their manager.
Yes. Definitely. Like, it's someone helping you shape your vision, and having someone that, like, you're not necessarily going to get an editor that you're going to be best friends with. But like, if you have someone that like every meeting is conflict, then maybe there is a problem,
Yeah. And there's also been definitely cases that I've seen where people are like trying to find a publisher. This is one of the reasons why it's important to get an agent, because the agents will usually know kind of on an individual level what the editors at the big publishers they're interested in shopping your product or your IP with are like. So like, I've seen examples where an agent is talking with an artist and the artist is like, oh, this publisher has sent us an email, is really interested. And the agent goes, no, I've talked with that editor. They have no idea what they're doing. And I don't think they're right for us. So let's move on to something else. So like being able to be agented or being able to...
Agents is like the sister job to editors. So if you are interested in publishing, traditionally, definitely get an agent. Atla is right. Get an agent. Agents are great. As an editor, do you have any specific advice to artists about communication that can help people in the editor's seat? Honesty, like, I feel like a lot of artists, when we give them feedback, they either feel like we're like, I don't know, like we're being mean or being too critical, or they're just dismissive, or they're like squishing their feelings down and they're not talking about it. Like, we have to be emphatic and honest, and you have to be emphatic and honest too, and like realize that we're like a person in front of you, and if you don't talk to us, we can't help. Like, I've had issues before where a creator has had problems for a really long time with the story they were dealing with, and essentially they would send me an email that's like, here's a list of all my problems, and if this doesn't get fixed in a week, I'm quitting comics forever. Like, you can't put me in that position. Like, I can't help you that fast. And, you know, it takes me 48 hours to check my emails. So by the time I actually look at the email, it's like I'm down to 5 days.
Yeah. Sometimes, no matter how nice you try to be, it still doesn't work. But I think... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just going to say real quick, is like also in the pipeline, like even the most indie like projects or some sort of structure in which things should be done, of like writers that come up to me and they're like, I have this idea for this, you know, story, whatever. Here's the script, and I go, okay, let's do this. And then like 2 weeks later, they're like, by the way, I've started working with an artist to start drawing it. And I'm like, no, but you hired me to tear this to shreds so you could rewrite it. Like, and that's like
Slow literally
down, busted. Yeah, like it's literally busted projects open or like broken them for like weeks at a time because they didn't understand that when I edit it, I have to like actually tell you what's wrong with it and not just give it my stamp of approval.
I think some people do just want that from an editor.
Yeah.
And if we don't give that, they get very resentful. So definitely like be honest about your feelings, and like, I guess always be aware that like we're here to help you. Like, that's why I was saying earlier that you get assigned an editor, and if you're not happy with an editor, definitely be open about the fact that you're not happy with them or they don't seem to understand your work. Because then you can talk about, okay, so what I'm getting from this is that you feel I don't understand you. Let's talk about why. Because you're trying to work with someone who's essentially, it's in the best interest of an editor to create a work that's good, because if it's a work that's good, it sells, and if it sells, the publisher gets to live another day and you get to have a book. Like, nobody in this team is trying to create something bad. So,
right.
You know, the editor's always there to help you. If you feel... If you're always defensive when an editor's talking to you and you feel like an editor is never here to help you, then, you know, that's not the right attitude to have coming in.
Yeah. I mean, just like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to negotiate, try to figure out the best compromise to get your own vision across versus what the editor themselves thinks needs to happen. Just try your best to talk it out and figure out the best direction for this story or this art or anything to go.
Yeah, and, you know, sometimes the editor, they suggest things that you don't necessarily like, but maybe there's a reason. You could just ask them to explain it deeply. Like, sometimes there's some choices that are done for, like, marketing reasons or IP marketability reasons or just identity of the publisher reasons. Like, or even just... because if you put this in, it bumps the book up an age group, and that means that it's going to like ruin all the sales pre-marketing they've already done. Like, if you promote a book to be a middle school thing, but then the artist comes along and it's like, oh, I really want to put this scene in, but this is a scene that you know that it means that every school who buys the book is going to send it back. Like, they're going to try to talk you down from it or try to transform the scene so you have a new scene that has the same kind of emotional beat but not the same content. Like, the editor
Yeah.
is here not just to make sure your story is good and that you're happy, but also to make sure that your story is well received by readers and by entities that want to purchase it. Because at the end of the day, the editor knows what the product should be, and you know what your story is, and you kind of have to like have those different things sort of mixed together
Yeah.
so everybody can survive and get paid, and that's fun.
We're all just trying to survive.
We're all
Yeah.
just trying to get paid.
Like especially in comics, it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot more stingy about like how much you can, like what you're able to do in terms of like or something like that. Like Coraline is worked and was able to thrive because it was words and it was harder to detect how scary it was. But something like a comic where you can just immediately visually see that it's not appropriate for like 8-year-olds or whatever.
Well, they did make
It's just gonna
Coraline
get-
as a comic, and it was terrifying. Like,
Yeah,
the movie is so much tamer. Like, the movie really is like freaking chill compared. Like, the comic just, they picked an artist that had a really, really kind of spooky style too. So they just have that scene in the basement where like her ghost dad is like pulling out of the earth to drag her down, and I'm like, what the fuck?
but that's because it then managed to succeed under the reputation that it was so scary despite its age range. Like,
Yeah.
if it had come out as a comic originally, it would have been regarded as like a big, what the fuck is this? And then it would have been cast away. But because it was already really, really successful, it was allowed to be like that.
I think another example, like, since we're talking about Neil Gaiman too, is because there was the book Neverwhere, which like as a book is fine. But then they had the comic, and the artist they pick with for the comic is just like, ooh, it's just not right for this comic. Like, it's not a bad artist. Like, this is not me going like, this artist is terrible. Like, they draw fine, but I wouldn't have picked this artist for this for multiple reasons. Like, oof, no. And I think they picked the artist because, like, it was an artist who was popular in, like, superheroes or something during the gritty superhero age, because that's really the style. It's, like, gritty, superhero-ish mood. But it just doesn't work. And there's so many unfortunate mistakes in the character designs, too, that I'm not going to get into because we basically have no more time left. But, yeah. Yeah, that's a strong point that Atla brought to the table. We have one last question in the thing. It's a really big one, so I don't know if we can get through this in 5 minutes, but we'll try.
We'll try it.
But
How has editing webcomics differed from, like, editing books for a big publisher, or is there no difference? To be honest, I think there's a big difference because you're not producing products for the same kind of consumption. So, because your job as an editor is to sort of create a product, you're obviously not going to approach both at the same time. Although there's some crossover, but yeah, you're not creating the same kind of product. One is for people to consume on a weekly basis and then make a book from, and one is to create a book that people have to buy not really knowing what's in it. Like, it's a
Yeah,
completely different.
I have to imagine the rate of production really changes how you would go about editing. I haven't actually. Oh, I mean, I've edited a couple of books, but they were originally webcomics, so.
Adela, you probably have the biggest experience between, like, traditional publishers and webcomics. What do you think?
oh, there's a big difference. Not to a hugely extreme degree. Like, it's still the same kind of general process, but it is very much like a time constraint, like Brad said. So when you're doing web comics, and when I'm doing like an average Hiveworks project, what I'm usually checking in is like, hey, how are we feeling? Are we okay? Do you need me for anything? Project management, yada yada yada. Like, you have this amount of time to do this. Let's see if you can make that deadline. Otherwise, we'll make a new deadline, stuff like that. When I do print comics, or comics that are primarily made to be printed, is very much just like, you have this much time. I think I can maybe use this trick to get you to work a little bit faster or give you extra time or something like that. Developing stuff like that. So like one thing that I sometimes do is, if a realistic goal is like for like, because you have to be like a middleman between the publisher and the artist, is if the artist says I can do this, you know, like 100 pages, 200 pages in 2 months, then I'll give the publisher 2 months and 4 days or whatever. Like as an
Yeah.
example, like as
No,
a
no,
as a fake
you
thing.
like double it. Anyways, like if an artist is like, I could do this in 2 months, you're gonna be like, all right, you have 4,
Exactly, like
because you
you
never know
create
what the
some.
fuck what's gonna happen. There's always something. Like it's never
Yeah,
nothing. It's always something.
and it's like it's a different crowd, it's a different like type of person. They're usually, there's a less chance of them being like, you know, like heavily marginalized, which means that you're dealing with a different type in general.
You're cutting out
um
again, Atla. You might want to repeat that last part.
Here we go. Yeah, so it, you're dealing basically with, like, when it comes to print publishing, you're dealing with a different kind of people. You're dealing usually with like less marginalized individuals than in like webcomics, because webcomics you can just print it for free, so there's less of a barrier for entry. um and so you're often, the type of people you're negotiating with, or the type of people that you're talking to and like requesting edits from, are completely different and elicit different reactions. Like they tend to, because they feel that time pressure, so they'll usually get a little bit more stingy. Like you might get more stingy because you feel that time pressure as well, you know.
Everybody's just pressured. Yeah, webcomics are hard. Like I always tell creators like some stories and some creators are just better for a webcomic, and some stories and some creators are better for print. Like sometimes if you quote unquote fail as a webcomic or fail in print, it doesn't mean that your comic is bad. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to flourish if you switch sides. And some people do switch sides, and some people should. Like,
Yeah.
they're very different production times, and they require very different stories, because what is marketable in print and what is marketable online is completely different. Like, I think it's important to be self-aware of your work. And I think especially if you hire a freelance editor, that editor is going to be like, this would work in print or this would work online. And that's part of why like being sort of attuned to the media pulse is like important.
I mean,
Um,
even with webcomics, even just as simple as like the schedule of your release, like
yeah.
can affect both the storytelling and just how well your comic is received. If people
And
like it in one big chunk, or if they need
yeah, even
smaller
the
updates
formatting.
weekly.
Like some people, like they have stories that if they publish it on webtoons and like a scroll down where it's multiple like pages per update, it works
Yeah.
really great. But then other stories, if you do that, it really sort of ruins the pacing. I think because there's this idea, especially on the internet, because of the low barrier of entry that Atlo was mentioning, I think there's this idea that like you could just do your work in any way possible, and what's important is to get it out there. But it sort of makes it so that people stop sort of considering medium and appropriate publishers for the work. They just want to get the work out there. Like they're hungry for this.
Yeah.
But you know, back when there was only print publishers, to match up a publisher's collection was a huge important point that would often determine who you would send your manuscript to. And I think because in this age where media is all over the place and people are all over the place and they're hungry for success, it sort of removed this idea that you have to sort of think about format and think about distribution and think about who you're trying to connect to. And I think it's important to sort of bring people back into that mindset, because if you create your work thinking about your readers and thinking about how you want to distribute it, you put less pressure on yourself because you're essentially paving the path to your success a bit more directly. And also you're like having a self-awareness that what you're creating at the end of the day, it has to incorporate readers, because readers are the last step of like the identity of a piece of art. readers give the identity of the piece of art, you know, the capacity to inspire and endear. So to not think about distribution and to not think about how you want to reach your audience at all is essentially a flaw. So like in this age of like just get it out there, it's important to sort of bring back the idea of like, but how do you want to get it out there, and does that work for you, or does it just make you feel like shit, you know?
Yeah.
I just wanted to cap that off. Like, I have both talked to, been part of projects, and seen artists and creators very clearly want to release it for themselves and like want this kind of like following or want people to engage with it, but don't want to actually engage with what it means to release it to the general public. That there's a difference between making something just for yourself that's never meant to be released and something. I think there is that kind of... Oh, did I cut out?
Yeah.
Oh, drat.
But just for that last part, you know, something that was meant to be really done for yourself or released to, and then you cut there.
Oh, sometimes like things are like, there's a difference between what's meant to be released for you and what's meant to be released for the general public. Like, and I think a lot of people want their work to just be held to like this kind of limelight and not to be criticized and not engage with the fact that their work has an effect on like the world, or at least the readership that they have, but still want the praise for having an effect on their readership.
Yeah, well, like, it's sort of this idea of like every work that's being disseminated gets treated as a professional commercial work. Like if I post the comic on Twitter, it's considered by readers as content, like, because it is content, because I posted it publicly.
Yeah.
But you know, and then you have a lot of creators who are like, it's not because I published it that I want people to react to it. But then it's like, then why did you publish it? Like, I feel it's this idea that if you're putting it out there, it indirectly becomes a product, because everything on the web is content based. Like it's like Twitter seeks products, Webtoon seeks products, Hiveworks seeks products. Like it's all divided up into things that are essentially making the space where you're pushing this marketed. So like that's sort of this idea that people were complaining about a lot, that, you know, anything you expose on the internet, like all hobbies have to become professional. Like, yes, that is an issue, because every kind of platform that is online and every kind of platform that is in print, because obviously there's an investment if you're printing a book, becomes like, makes stuff framed as a product. So there's this idea of like making people who really want to do stuff for themselves actually do stuff for themselves and not necessarily feel the need to share it. Like, because anything you share has that point of view. And you sort of always have to exercise this idea that like, because it's always public, then it's always product, is sort of like a really hard mindset to start to absorb, because it's really depressing. But
it's
at the same
that millennial hustle.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, this is the late stage capitalism mindscape we live in. And I feel like thinking about it this way also kind of helps you like get your heart broken way less, because you're not going like, I don't understand what's wrong with people. I posted my super personal introspective thing about my mother that used to beat me and people are talking about it. Like, yeah.
Just because I set up this art gallery show doesn't mean you had to come here.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. And I mean, it kind of sucks in a way, but like, that's why you sort of have to talk to people, and this is the job that the editor does, but you also have to train sort of like the editor inside your mind to go like, is this work that should be public, or is this work that should be private? And by private, we don't mean post to your personal Twitter. By private, we mean you draw it to like exercise your storytelling and doodling muscles, and then you do nothing with it, or you just print it as like a limited zine that people have to buy physically. Like, you have to control the distribution method a little bit. Because, yeah, you shouldn't put everything out there, because everything out there becomes consumed. it's just how it is. Or maybe you can if you don't care, like, but then you have to have the mindset to not care. Like,
gotta own it.
But then that's like awareness also, like to post it out there and be like, I don't give a shit, I'm a rebel. Like, you're still aware that it's a product though. Like, you came to this conclusion knowing this.
Yeah, and like we're totally out of time. We're like 15 minutes past it.
I know.
But we're still invested in this. Like, editors inherently know that like the stories that you make have an impact, and there's this whole debate online where it's like, does fiction affect reality? And like,
yeah,
kind of. Yes, kind of, because otherwise we wouldn't be telling you when you have like a racist character in your story. We wouldn't be telling you like, hey, that's not okay, because it's gonna be hurtful. It's gonna introduce like very young impressionable readers that this is okay, which is not okay. Like, we wouldn't have this kind of sense of this moral compass about what we should talk about as editors and how we should go about talking about it when we do talk about it, if it didn't in some way affect readership, even if it's just so baseline, just like, are they going to be happy or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything is distribution now, so you always have to think about it. Everything is stories, you know. It's a bit silly, but you know, this is the mind we live in, the minefield we live in, and that's why everybody kind of has to develop editorial skills. It's the same sort of basic line as like, if you're learning to be an artist, you should definitely take some management courses like accounting and shit, because that's kind of, you know, stuff you should know. It's kind of the same. You should have some media literacy awareness. And, you know, I'm aware that it takes time to develop this, and not everybody has the environment where they can, like, freaking read every novel ever made. Like, not everybody has a public library that's, like, 10 steps from them. They have to take 5 buses to get there. But that's where the idea of community helps, I think. You have... Yeah, that's... You have editors in your community, you have other artists, and, you know, they're your pals.
Yeah.
They're here to help. It's probably the best.
It's a form of...
I thought you're cutting out.
Cutting out a lot. I think that is then cause for us to close off this chat, yeah?
Yeah, well, we went overboard a little bit. Too many good questions. This is definitely the panel we had the most questions for.
I'm glad.
That was really fun. I'm really glad that we helped people understand editors a bit more. We're here to help. Like, and again, not every editor is a good editor. Maybe you'll get a bad one. If you get a bad one, it's okay if you're upset, and it's okay if you want to get rid of them and talk to the manager. It's fine. It's perfectly understandable. Nobody's going to be mad. Well, maybe that guy's going to be mad, but whatever. He's a dick. What do you care?
Yeah. Look, editors are your friends, and if someone isn't your friend, if they're being abusive, manipulative, then talk to their manager, get someone else.
Yeah, they're not a good friend then. Like, it's pretty, it's pretty much there. Definitely read a lot of books. A lot of people say, like, oh, you shouldn't read books about the hero's journey or like the 3-act structure, because, you know, all work is based on that. But actually, I say the opposite, that you should totally read books about this, because all work is based on that. So, you know, anybody who's telling you don't read things so they don't influence you, or don't read things because it's too classic, don't listen to those jamokes, because absolutely you need to know the basics. So I recommend that. Read a bunch of books about that kind of stuff. And, you know, if you like a book, like a novel, definitely check out who the publisher and the editor is. It's usually in the copyright page. If you find editors that you like, you'll notice that they probably make a lot of books that you appreciate. And that's a really good way to sort of get to know an editor. Yeah. So thanks a bunch for tuning in, everybody. And thank you, Adela and Brad, for being here. Again, reminder, Brad Brown, author of Blaster Nation and the mature comic Rockcocks. Do not read if you're not 18.
If you are 18, please read.
Yeah, please read. Adela, who is an editor at Hiveworks and a co-author of many projects that I don't think they're all announced yet, but definitely follow Adela on Twitter to get some more of that good stuff. Reminder that we've got a sale going on in our store, Spring 2020. Get 10% off, get those sweet, sweet bucks, and check out the Kickstarters that Hiveworks got currently running. Alice in Nightmare Book 1 and Among Us Book 1, both very good books. Long descriptions on the Kickstarter page that you should check out. And we've got another panel in about 40 minutes. That one is World Building Nopes. So if you want to stay connected to the stream, it's going to start in 40 minutes here. Otherwise, we'll just come back or check it out later, because all this is going to be posted on YouTube. So you can like, share, subscribe, etc. to our YouTube page and show to your friends who might have questions about editors this wacky little presentation. Anything to say, Brad or Atla, sort of close out, say goodbye?
Vote for Bernie.
Yeah. Definitely. Socialism, y'all.
But your work is a self-expression of yourself, and you can never remove yourself from the work that you make. So be careful of what you're saying through your work. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.